If you're such a mess, there's no way you're my kid. Get lost, you pig, yelled Bob. Bob and I stepped in to protect Luke. If you won't recognize Luke as your own son, I'll take him in. Days later, when they saw Luke on TV, they came to our house, saying, "Luke, come home with us." Luke asked, "Who are you guys?" "I'm Katherine Johnson. After my husband passed away a few years ago, I've been living alone in a big house, and it's been very lonely. My days were boring, except for one thing, seeing my grandson Luke. My son Bob and his wife Michelle run a nightclub that seems to be doing well. They're always busy. After several years of marriage, they had a baby. They were hoping for a girl to become a star at their club, so they bought lots of baby girl stuff. But the baby was a boy, which was a huge disappointment for them. You'd think they'd love the baby anyway, but that wasn't the case. Bob and Michelle showed no interest in him and didn't even care about his name. I suggested a few names, and they picked Luke. Bob and Michelle kept ignoring Luke, hoping for a girl next time, but they never had another child. Michelle grew to resent Luke, blaming him for their failed plans, saying things like, "Our plans are ruined because you're not a girl, it's all your fault." Michelle and Bob started treating Luke with increasing coldness. I wish I had stepped in earlier. Maybe things wouldn't have turned out so badly. Eventually, Michelle stopped cooking for Luke and instead left a $5 bill on the table each day before going to work, not returning until early morning. Luke was left alone from evening until night, waiting for his parents to come home. Imagine how scary and lonely that must have been for a young child. With the money Michelle left, Luke bought his meals at the convenience store. Being a child, he didn't think about balanced nutrition and often chose sweets and potato chips. Sometimes he ate food that was about to be thrown away. A kind store worker noticed Luke's situation and occasionally shared extra food with him, so even on days when Michelle didn't leave money, Luke didn't go hungry. By the time Luke was in 3rd grade, he weighed over 150 pounds due to his unhealthy diet of sweets and convenience store food. Bob and Michelle were unhappy about this. They started being verbally abusive, calling him names and telling him he was a burden. They said things like, "Look at how fat you've gotten. You're not my child. You're just a fat burden. Get out." Hearing this broke my heart. I worried about how Luke felt hearing such things from his own father. I visited their house occasionally to check on him. From their tone, I could tell Bob and Michelle were growing more resentful of Luke. One day, I went to their house to see if they were mistreating Luke. As soon as I opened the door, I heard Bob yelling, "There's no way a fat kid like you could be my child. Get lost, you pig." I rushed towards the noise and found Luke lying on the floor, with his hand on his cheek, suggesting Bob had hit him. I quickly moved to protect Luke from Bob. Luke looked up at me with a vacant, resigned expression, which made me regret that such a young boy had to endure such pain. Bob seemed oblivious to my arrival, his eyes wide with shock. "Do you even understand what you're saying?" I shouted at Bob. "Luke is genuinely your child." Even though Bob is my son, I couldn't understand his thoughts at all. I couldn't believe he was treating his own innocent son so poorly just because Luke wasn't the daughter he wanted. "If you won't recognize Luke as your child, I'll take him in," I said firmly. Both Luke and Bob were taken aback by my sudden decision. Bob and Michelle, seeing this as a chance to get rid of their problem, eagerly accepted my offer. "Thanks, Mom, now I can focus on my business," Bob said. "Thank you so much," Michelle added with a smile that seemed a bit too bright. Their cheerful faces made me sad because it was clear how little they cared about Luke. I had thought it was best for Luke to be with his real parents, but I deeply regretted not taking him in sooner. On the way back to my house, Luke said, "I'm sorry, I'll grow up quickly and move out." I was confused by his words and asked him what he meant. Luke replied with a serious expression, "You regret taking me in on a whim, don't you? You look angry." Seeing Luke's worried face, I reassured him, "No, I regret not doing this sooner. I should have realized that you'd be better off with me rather than staying with them." "Are you annoyed with me?" Luke asked, looking anxious. I hugged him tightly and said, "No way, I love you more than they ever could." Luke seemed unsure how to react. He stood still for a moment, then softly said, "This is the first time I've been hugged." Tears filled my eyes, and I vowed to make him happy no matter what. From that day on, Luke changed. He became lively, cheerful, and more talkative. Every day when he came home from school, he eagerly helped prepare dinner and excitedly shared stories about his day. "You seem very cheerful today. Did something good happen?" I asked him. "Do you know something funny happened today?" Luke told me. while we were singing in music class, a sparrow flew into the room. The teacher panicked and almost started crying, saying she couldn't handle birds. Luke chuckled as he remembered the story, and his cute, lovable smile made my heart melt. Since Luke started eating healthier meals at my place, he's become more fit, though he still has his childlike charm. He's grown into a handsome young boy. He shyly mentioned that the girls at school have started talking to him more, and it was clear he was happy. I was relieved to see him so content. The day of the first parent-teacher conference after Luke came to live with me arrived. The teacher suggested, "Why don't you have him take an IQ test at the hospital?" I was anxious at first, worried they were hinting something was wrong with Luke's intelligence. "Is Luke falling behind?" I asked. The teacher quickly reassured me, "No, it's actually the opposite. Based on my experience, I believe Luke might be gifted." I was unfamiliar with the term gifted. The teacher explained that it refers to children who have higher abilities compared to their peers. He handed me a graph showing Luke's grades. The graph revealed a sharp upward trend in his performance, particularly right after he moved in with me. Surprised by the sudden improvement, I asked Luke, "Have you started going to cram school or something?" Luke shook his head and said, "No, I just started doing well in tests normally. Before, I'd intentionally leave answers blank or get them wrong to avoid drawing attention. At my old home, if they saw I was doing well, they didn't like it and would hit me more. So, I'd make it look like I didn't know the answers, even though I did." Luke shrugged and smiled smugly. "Now that I don't have to do that, I just take the tests normally. It's so easy, it's boring. Even reading the textbooks makes everything clear in class, and I want to study something more challenging." I looked at Luke with concern, worried that the teacher might be offended by what he said, but my fears were quickly put to rest when I heard the teacher laughing heartily. "If Luke is gifted, we might be able to provide support that suits him," the teacher said. "Why not get him tested at the hospital?" With that in mind, I decided to take Luke to the hospital over the weekend. Based on his behavior at school and home, as well as the results of his IQ test, it seemed Luke might indeed be gifted. The doctor confirmed this, noting that Luke's IQ was significantly higher than average. I was surprised by how smart Luke was. It explained why he found school so easy. To help him with more challenging studies, I decided to hire a private tutor. The tutor, a seasoned professional who graduated from a prestigious American university, understood Luke's needs well. Luke was thrilled with the private tutoring, finding it more engaging than school. He excelled in both English and Chinese proficiency tests, earning top grades. The tutor proudly shared about his exceptional student on social media, and soon Luke became the talk of the town, with newspapers and TV stations requesting interviews. One day, while I was spending time with Luke, the doorbell rang. I expected reporters, but was surprised to find Bob and Michelle standing at the door. "Long time no see, Mom. We've come to get Luke," Bob said. I was taken aback. "What are you doing here?" "Luke has an interview soon. I'm very busy, please leave." When Bob and Michelle heard about the interview, their faces lit up. "So it's really Luke on TV? Our son is truly remarkable." They were visibly excited. Bob and Michelle exchanged eager looks and then excitedly shared their plan. "If Luke comes back, our shop will be secure," Bob said. Michelle nodded vigorously in agreement. "If we get customers coming in to see Luke, our sales will go up. In the long run, we could even let him manage things for us. It would make our lives so much easier," Bob and Michelle said. I was stunned by their selfishness. After rejecting Luke as their child, they showed up to take him back now that they realized how talented he is. A child isn't a possession to be used for personal gain. Don't they understand that? My patience was running thin, and I was ready to confront them when Luke appeared behind me. Seeing Luke, Bob and Michelle broke into smiles, which only added to my irritation, but their smiles were quickly shattered by Luke's words. "Who are you guys?" Luke asked, staring at them directly. They looked confused. "We're your dad and mom. You're our beloved child, whom we suffered to bring into this world," Michelle said. Her claim made me sick. How dare she call him her beloved child? Just as I was about to respond, Luke smirked and said, "My only family here is my grandmother. I don't know you people who abandoned me." "Luke, that woman is your grandmother, not your mother. Come back home with us," Bob said, trying to persuade him gently. Luke glared at him. "My home is here with my grandma. Unlike you, she's always shown me love. You abandoned me, and now you want me back because you think I'm useful. You're not my parents." It was the first time Luke had ever raised his voice like that. Bob and Michelle flinched at his outburst. Bob, visibly irritated, tried to grab Luke's arm. Just as I was about to intervene, a voice called out from behind Bob, "Is what he said true? Did you abandon him?" Journalists had started to gather, their faces serious, as it was time for the scheduled interview. The reporters surrounded Bob and Michelle, bombarding them with questions. The interview was later broadcast on television with the sensational title, "The Tragic Past of a Genius Boy and the Parents Who Abandoned Him." The impact was huge. Bob and Michelle faced backlash on social media and received countless angry calls. People were outraged, asking how they could abandon a child just because he wasn't a girl and accusing them of manipulating him for their own convenience. Crowds gathered to see the faces of these terrible parents, and their business suffered greatly. In desperation, Michelle reached out to her own parents for help but received a cold response: "You reap what you sow, deal with it yourself. We have no intention of helping anyone who abandoned their child." Bob and Michelle were widely scorned and abandoned. They reportedly cried out in frustration, "Why is this happening to us?" I hoped this would be a wake-up call for them, though their attitudes suggested otherwise. After the incident, Luke and I decided to move far away to cut ties with them completely. I respected Luke's wish to sever all connections, and we relocated to prevent them from approaching him again. We would have sought legal measures if possible, but it's difficult to sever ties with biological parents, even if they are adoptive. At Luke's new school, he made a good friend who seemed to understand him well. Luke would bring him home, show him his homemade programming projects, and excitedly explain his interests. While I found some of Luke's interests hard to follow, his friend listened attentively and nodded along. They often became engrossed in discussions about programming. Seeing Luke so happy and engaged made me feel glad we moved. Thanks to his new friend, Luke has been able to live freely and happily every day. I hope they continue to support and enjoy each other's company.